Hello, everybody out there in game development land. I have been asking you over the past couple of weeks if there are particular topics that you want me to do videos on. And one thing that comes up quite a lot is the concept of motivation and how to stay motivated on a project, whether it's a project you're doing on your own or working within a team. So I'm going to talk about that today. And I'm going to talk about the difference between discipline and motivation a little bit, and some things you can do to help yourself stay motivated or to help yourself develop discipline, whether you're a solo developer or working with other people. You're not going to like all my answers because you never do. And they're not going to work for everyone either. I'll just put that out there. But they are all to do with building an iterative process that has feedback at the heart of it, which is something you should be doing as a designer anyway. And most forms of creative practice should involve something like this, unless what you're doing is kind of pure art, like you're just doing it to experiment and express yourself, which I think the vast majority of people who make games aren't doing that. We want other people to play and enjoy the thing we make. We're not just doing whatever because we think it will be cool. I think the first thing to really acknowledge is that motivation is an unstable energy. It's not something we have an endless supply of, and it comes to us in drips and drabs. It comes to us in waves. And that means there are going to be times when we lack it. And sometimes that is just a sign to rest, but sometimes it is a sign that, you know, if you're running entirely on motivation and no other force, well, you're going to be the sort of person that never finishes things, never gets things done. And for that reason, it's important to acknowledge the difference between motivation and discipline. Now, a lot of us have grown up in the types of environments where when there's something we don't want to do, someone else encourages us to do that, whether it's someone at school or someone at home. And in psychology, they call that having a external locus of control. There are a bunch of studies into parenting to do with this. And basically, if a parent is really, really strict with their kids and they bring them up in a very authoritarian environment, then that kid is going to find it a lot harder to self-motivate because they're used to someone else doing it for them. When they become teenagers, they rebel more because they have an external locus of control. They want someone outside of themselves to take the lead and tell them what to do and so on. So they go from having very strict parents, being very well behaved, and then when there's like some cool kid who's like encouraging them to smoke or drink or something, they sort of shift their locus of control from their parents to that cool kid because they are used to someone outside of themselves sort of disciplining and motivating them. So this can be very, very challenging because if you are a self-taught creative person, chances are you do have some sort of internal locus of control. You are kind of self-driven, but you do it in fits and starts. And that's because what you do is based on your own motivation when it's there and not on self-discipline of like, I will do this thing every day until I get better at it. Motivation is inconsistent. It comes in waves. It's like inspiration. It's something that we can just get from something we've seen or something we've experienced, and then it goes away again after a while. And it is really helpful for driving initial creativity. So the point of putting these together is to say that you need both of these forces acting on you if you're ever going to make anything good. You need motivation to sort of start doing things in the first place and to kind of have that initial like, okay, I can make this game or I can do this project or whatever. And the reasons you want to do that are the motivators, right? That could be something very extrinsic, like wanting to be self-employed, wanting to have a passive income when you finish something and it just keeps making money. It could be that you want to express a particular thing. It could be that you want to do some sort of experiment. There is a type of game that hasn't been made that you want to see made. These are all kind of motivating factors that are going to give you that initial push, but they're not going to consistently be there all the way through the project, because there'll be times when you're looking at how much work you've got to do and you'll just be thinking, oh, it's not worth it. I can't keep doing this. So in order to do that and in order to push yourself through that situation, you're going to need some form of discipline, which is kind of an opposing force. It is based on kind of flat, consistent habits of like, what do you do every day? Or what do you do a certain amount of times a week? And discipline is necessary for mundane or repetitive tasks. And if you are totally driven by motivation, then when it comes to doing the more boring parts of your project, you're going to need some form of self-discipline in order to do that, because it's kind of much less exciting and creative work. It is, drudgery to some degree. Now, most of us have goals that we know we want to achieve. You want to release a game, you want to write an album, you want to write a book, whatever it is. We know what that is. In sports, it would be we want to win the league. It's usually kind of easy to understand what your goals are, even if you're not open with other people about them. And being open with other people about them can be very helpful with some of the stuff we're going to talk about later. But generally, people do not have a problem with setting themselves goals, right? Everyone, or the majority of people who watch this channel, are making a game, and they would like to achieve the goal of releasing their game, and they would like people to buy it, right? Whether or not they think they're capable of doing that is another thing, but goals are usually quite clear. The problem that most of us have is creating processes which can lead to the goals actually being fulfilled. So in this case, we've got a football example, or soccer if you are from one of the countries where football is played with the hands, and here we practice Tuesday and Thursday nights, right? So there is a process of what is being done and when. If it's making a game, you have certain times a day where you kind of lock in and just do that thing for a while. Last month when we were doing the game jam and I was just working on art, there were lots of days where I just sat down and streamed and did an hour of art. And I didn't do more than that each day. And I got way more done in sort of 5 days of doing an hour a day than I probably would have done if I sat down and tried to do an entire 8-hour day, because of that kind of time compression that happens when you decide on a process and say, this is how I'm doing the thing, right? The process often doesn't need to be the best process. You just need to kind of have it there, because then that turns some of the thing you're trying to achieve, your goal, into a disciplinary habit of something that you can do over and over again. And you're usually going to get something out of it, even if it doesn't look like progress on your project, even if it doesn't look like you've got much further in your game. You've probably still got a little bit better at one of the skills you need in order to achieve that goal. Now, the reason I brought up sort of schooling and parenting at the start is that those of us who are able to have successful creative careers are the people who are able to take that position over ourselves as a disciplinary figure, right? So in our early lives, we are used to adults disciplining us to some degree, whether they do it rightly or wrongly. We have that external locus of control. Someone else is there to help us make decisions and help us prioritize what we need to do. And as we reach adulthood, our success as an adult is to some degree mediated by whether we can take that role over for ourselves and become self-disciplinary. And a lot of what I'm talking about here also relates to how I run my YouTube channel. When I was operating purely on the basis of making videos, I found it very, very hard to maintain motivation. When I switched to streams and I could schedule them ahead of time, it became a lot easier to be motivated, because other people have like an expectation that I'm going to do this particular thing at this particular time. And even if they don't really care that much, it still makes me feel more pressured to do the thing and to focus on like whatever the next step is, because I know I've told people I'm going to do that thing on that day. So next I want to tell you a hack, and I'm going to give you some music-based examples and then show you how they translate to game development. Now the hack is to create internal discipline for yourself through external commitments. And this is kind of outsourcing accountability. And your mileage may vary on this. Like some people say, don't tell people too much about your plans, because sometimes you can just sort of trick yourself into feeling good because you said you're going to do the thing. That's not necessarily what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about actually committing to showing people something at a given deadline. So if we take the example of being in a band or being in a music scene, here's my band. We're not going to take over the world. We're not going to be big famous rock stars, but we practice every 2 weeks. The only way I'm able to be motivated to practice that often is by having shows lined up. So this cycle up at the top, you have a show, so you practice for it. And in order to practice for it, you need to have songs. So you write the songs, right? And it becomes a kind of iterative circle. And this is kind of similar to game design. The problem that a lot of people have when they're trying to make a game is they don't have these baked in review stages where you have to show something to people. And pretty much any textbook on game development or game design will talk about this, and it will talk about how you should playtest your game, you should get it in front of people and playtest it. And often the benefit of doing so is just presented as the game will get better. The game will get better because you will get feedback and you will now know what to do next. And that is true, but I think one of the things that people miss out on is the benefit this can have on your motivation. Because by saying we've got to get a build ready by the 1st of July because we've got that thing where we're going to show people the game, well, it's a deadline. It's a self-imposed deadline that has some outside enforcement, and then that becomes disciplinary because you are going to feel like you've let people down if you do not have that thing ready by that time. So when you're trying to make games, you should have some sort of regular deadline when you're trying to get a build ready to show people, right? If you're working in a big commercial studio, this would be baked in. If you were working under Agile Scrum, you would be testing a build every 2 weeks, and whatever is in the build at that time is in the build. And that means that sometimes people scramble and they go, right, I really need to make sure this feature isn't broken before people test the build and prioritize and everything. The problem that lots of indie developers face when you're coming from a hobbyist background is there is none of that discipline. And why should there be? You're just working on your own, right? And in order to have that benefit of that kind of disciplinary approach, you need to have someone outside who is looking in somehow. And you're going to be thinking, well, how do I achieve that? No one cares about my game. Well, I'm going to go through some examples of how you can achieve that in a moment. But you need some sort of way of reviewing what you're doing by showing it to the outside world. And there are lots of different places you can do that are not just on the internet. So classes, going into people's classes as a visiting developer, because you might think, oh, I'm no big deal. No one wants me to kind of show them my game or whatever. But it may be that if you've been doing this for a few years, actually something like a college class or a high school class would be more than happy to have you come in and give a talk about what you're doing and get people to play test your game or whatever. So that is an example of something you could do to set yourself a deadline. You could get in touch with some sort of tutor and say, hey, in September, I'd like to give a talk to your students about game development, and in exchange, I'd like them to playtest my game. That's a really good example of this kind of thing. And you're doing multiple things there. You're setting yourself a deadline so you've got something to work towards, which if you were working in a more commercial context, your publisher would do or your producer would do, and you'd have that there as a kind of external force of discipline. You can create that for yourself by making a promise to people that at some point in the future, at a specific date, you're going to have this build ready and you're going to show it to them and you're going to talk them through it. The reason why I think doing this in the context of a kind of educational context is really helpful is you sort of have a captive audience. There are people there who really want to talk to a game developer, and maybe they're stuck in a class where they're getting taught games by some old fuddy-duddy computer science person who doesn't really care about games. That happens. That's quite common. Don't be afraid to reach out to anywhere local to you where you think there might be someone who wants to playtest a game and have a little free talk from a game developer, because even if you've only been doing this for a couple of years and you don't feel sort of like an expert enough to do that, you probably are. And the only way you stop feeling imposter syndrome about that type of thing is just to do it. The second thing on the list, maybe a bit more self-explanatory, is conventions. Now, there are types of convention where you have to pay to have a stall to set up, but I have personally found over the years that small local conventions, not just for games, but for like geek culture in general, are usually very, very happy to have a video game developer there with a laptop. And the thing here is to be flexible about your expectations of what type of convention you show a game at. You might be able to take your game to a local board game convention or something like a, trading card thing. It might be like a general geek culture convention, like a cosplay thing or something like that. Often those types of things, if there is one local to you, even if it's not video game specific or indie game specific, will be happy to have a developer at it talking to people, because you get free entry to the convention and they get another thing to say that they've got, right? And it may be that, hey, let's say you live in a town where you know a couple of other game developers. You can approach them as a group and say, there's only 4 or 5 of us, but can we set up a little section with our own tables and have a little indie game playtest corner? It's a weird experience presenting games at those types of things. You might end up with an audience who are really mean because they only play Call of Duty and they go,
ugh, why is your game pixel art? Why doesn't it have realistic machine guns in it
or whatever. But it can be a really, really helpful thing. And like I said, whether or not the specific event is that helpful to you, the kind of meta goal of doing this sort of thing is giving yourself a deadline to have a build ready by, right? And then if that event is helpful, then that's a bonus on top of that. The third point on this list, I've sort of already alluded to in this video, but clubs, like game development clubs. Now, if there isn't one near to you, like I don't have one near to me at the moment, as far as I'm aware, but you sort of think there would be a couple of people around who might be interested in it, maybe you just need to start the club that you yourself would like to join. And that might just start out as something like a Facebook group or a WhatsApp group or something. But the important thing is if you have a regular meetup once a month or once every 2 months, then again, that can be a thing that you can have a deadline attached to. If you use these kind of external events to create deadlines for yourself, you will have a better motivation for doing the thing. Most of us are used to having someone outside of ourselves to kind of do things for. And the reason why we never finish our games, the reason we never release them is because we need that same thing in the context of our game development. And if it's not there, we need to create it for ourselves somehow. Here we go. By the power of Google, I have discovered a list of upcoming British and Irish video gaming conventions. So if I were seriously working on my own game at the moment, and I'd sort of looked at the game, estimated the workload and said, right, I could probably have a vertical slice ready in 3 months. Then I might look at this list and say, what is happening in 3 months that I could take a kind of vertical slice demo to? And then from that, I could say, okay, I'm gonna take this vertical slice demo to one of these conventions, watch people play the game, find out the biggest problems people have with understanding the game or what they're finding frustrating or not fun. And then that means that when I do my public beta in 6 months, I'll have based that on some sort of data I've collected at this thing, right? So you're killing 2 birds with 1 stone. You are setting yourself a deadline, which gives you motivation to get things done by a particular time. And that thing is an external playtest, which is something you should be trying to do anyway as a game designer. This is the iterative cycle. This is kind of what should happen in game development generally. You make something, you show it to people, you think about what you saw when you showed it to people, and then you rebuild it. There are types of games where it's harder to do this. It's harder to do this with like a pure puzzle game where once you've done it, once you know how to do it, right? That means you have to just keep testing with new people. But this is generally the way games are developed. It's the way successful games are developed, through a process of iterating by doing the thing, testing it with someone representative of the final audience, and doing it again. And there are lots of successful games that have like a freeware version that goes out first, and then the kind of deluxe version that they ask money for comes out later, because the freeware version is used to test things. It's like a step in the iterative cycle of making the game. One more thing I think I should say on the topic of motivation is that it is okay to just stop doing something. But if you are using these kind of iterative processes where there is some sort of testing with an audience involved, then those processes are going to help you to decide when to quit something or when to put something on hold. It might be that the game you're making is really good, but you're just sick of it because you're tired with it. And as a creative person, you're very driven by novelty and you want to do something else. So you sort of convince yourself that the thing you're working on isn't very good because you just want to move on to another project because you enjoy starting projects more than finishing them. If you build these iterative processes which have some outside involvement in, then when you hit this point where you're thinking, oh, maybe I should quit this project, then you can actually base that on something. You've got your kind of simple iterative loop there of show, review, build. And by showing things to people, you can then decide when it's time to put something on pause and maybe come back to it later on. You can decide when it's time to just start something else. If you don't have that process, then you are just totally basing that on your own gut feelings about the thing, which may just be based on boredom rather than if the game is any good. Thank you for your time today. I hope you found this useful and motivating. Patreon.com/Indie Game Clinic if you want to support this channel. If you become a paid member, that means I can keep putting this stuff out as free to watch on YouTube without having to go down the route of like building a course and asking people to pay me £1,000 for stuff that I should really just put out for free. So thank you to everyone who's already become a patron and is supporting the channel that way. And if you're new to this channel, subscribe, like the video, hang around, check out some of the other stuff on my playlists and let me know what you think. Really always helpful to hear from you guys and find out what you find useful or what you find confusing and all that kind of stuff. So thank you very much and see you again soon.
Thank you to the patrons. You have enabled this thing to exist. Thank you to the patrons. Why put your name on this list? Thank you to the patrons. Your donations show that you can. Thank you to the patrons. We got some more robots, may you be spared.